Hello and welcome again to this edition of Meet the Candidates. I'm David Nicholas, and here on WCMU we are speaking this time with our guest virtually, and that includes our guest today, Congressman Dan Kildee, a Democrat in Michigan's congressional district for the U.S. House, District number 5. He is the incumbent seeking a 5th term. And welcome, Congressman. Good to have you here. Congratulations on the win in August. And start out by telling us in the first minute or two a little bit about you, your experience and background you bring to the campaign.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. I wish I could be there in person on campus. I always enjoy coming back. I was born and raised in Flint, Michigan. Grew up there, spent really my entire life there until leaving to come down here to Washington for part of the time. Graduated from the Flint schools, went to the University of Michigan Flint, ultimately graduated from Central Michigan University. I started off as a social worker, but I found my way into local government. I got elected to the school board in Flint. Then I served as a county commissioner and then county treasurer. And then I worked to establish a new way to deal with vacant and abandoned property. People might have heard of the term land bank. Well, that's in part my creation. And so I spent a good deal of my time as county treasurer also trying to breathe life back into vacant and abandoned properties. That led to the formation of a national nonprofit organization, which I founded and led, which still is working. But in 2012, I ran for Congress, and I've been now in Congress since then. In my 4th term, I'm the Chief Deputy Whip for the House Democrats. I serve on the House Ways and Means Committee and the Budget Committee, and I focus a lot of my attention on the U.S. economy and how to not only grow the economy, but make sure that that growth is experienced by everyone, including older industrial cities like Flint, Saginaw, Bay City, those communities that I represent.
As you mentioned, the economy and also the impact of COVID and its overarching impact that we have seen. As you approach this seeking re-election to another term, Congressman, what are the voters telling you and what are you identifying through that lens of the pandemic as the key issues of this campaign?
Well, virtually everywhere we go, it's the front of mind issue for everyone, whether it's just the health aspects. A lot of people are still obviously very concerned about COVID and what it means to their health, or the economic result of the pandemic. Either way, COVID is the subject. And what people tell me is that they want to have us have a thoughtful plan to defeat this virus and to get ourselves back to some kind of normal, knowing that it may take time. And so that's what I've been focusing my energy on, is to try to make sure that the federal government is consciously attempting to deal with this virus in a way that protects public health and make sure that we have an economy standing when we do get through this crisis. I've been disappointed in the president's leadership on this. I've been very public about that. But during this time, the most important thing is that we focus on getting the resources into the hands of people who are working to defeat this virus, and support small business, support workers, support schools and local governments so that we don't see everything fall apart while we're fighting to defeat coronavirus.
With all of that in mind, what key proposals are you bringing to the campaign that would address that overarching need, not only from the public health concern, but that very vital economic recovery when we do get on the other side of this?
So I've had several pieces of the recovery plan that have been my product. For example, I am the author of the unemployment benefit legislation that would extend through into 2021. It was included in the HEROES Act that we passed as a part of the House response, the second major piece of legislation that we passed to respond to coronavirus. But I've also been involved in other aspects of this. I have a Main Street relief plan that I worked on with Senator Cory Booker and a couple of Republican Senators, Steve Daines and Republican Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick, a bipartisan bill that would help fund local relief efforts so that those small businesses that might not qualify for the existing program, which is called the Paycheck Protection Program, a forgivable loan program, important, but not complete enough. So my legislation would think about those very small businesses, sort of the mom and pop operation that might not fit one of the existing programs. So that's the approach I've been taking, is to fight this thing on all fronts. Unemployment for those who've lost their jobs, stimulus payments to keep money in the economy, small business support through the Paycheck Protection Program, My Main Street Relief Act, but also support for hospitals, healthcare providers to do testing, tracing, isolation, and treatment, but also, and I think, importantly, ensuring that local government and state government doesn't see such a revenue loss that they have to cut essential public services at a time when those services are more needed than ever. So it's an approach that has to be comprehensive. And so that's where I've spent most of my focus, to try to make sure that the next step, whatever it is, doesn't leave anyone behind.
And not minimizing any of those efforts, but have there been other priorities and concerns that you have wanted to address in this campaign, or would still try to do so, that have been, shall we say, overshadowed or superseded by the overall concern as driven by the circumstances of COVID-19?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because there is a need for us to do a lot. We've got a lot of unfinished business in this country. Interestingly enough, it all kind of ends up connecting in some ways to the coronavirus issue. Like, for example, I've been a big advocate of major reinvestment in our aging infrastructure, rails, water and sewer lines, roads and bridges, ports, all those aspects of the built environment that are really important to the economy. And while that doesn't seem like it's connected to coronavirus, I think it could very well be a part of the economic stimulus package that we need in order to get us out of the recession that has been driven by coronavirus. So some of the pieces that were certainly an issue long before coronavirus came along, they can be viewed in the context of coronavirus, in the sense that they're even more important now that we are in a recession than they were when we began pushing for these things a few years ago.
Speaking with Congressman Dan Kildee, a Democrat of Flint and candidate for the 5th congressional race in Michigan, seeking a 5th term to that office. About 5 minutes left with you, Congressman. Then noting also infrastructure and its impact and connection to COVID-19, what other issue might you highlight that you or the voters have brought to you as a concern for the campaign?
I think a couple of things. One is to make sure that we continue to do what we can to get healthcare costs under control. One of the pieces of legislation I've been working on through the Ways and Means Committee is effort to reduce the cost of prescription drugs. It's a shame, I think nearly a crime, that in the 21st century, where we have access to incredible therapies, that there are people in this country who are sick, who can't get that therapy, can't get that drug that's right across the counter in the pharmacy, because the drug companies have priced that therapy, that treatment, that cure right out of the marketplace. And so that if you don't have a really great healthcare plan that has prescription drug coverage, you can't get access to it. We think the federal government should be able to negotiate those drug prices, and my legislation would do that. That's one really big piece. Another one that's really important is around retirement security, and especially Social Security. Social Security is a promise. We need to make sure we keep that promise. And we have legislation, Social Security 2100, that I have sponsored, that would ensure the longevity, the sort of sacred promise of Social Security, and that it's going to be kept without any major increase in those premiums, but by making sure over time we close that gap and allow the amount of income subject to Social Security taxation to rise. We can close that gap. We can make sure that that promise is there, and no middle or low income person would have to pay more.
In our last 3 minutes or so, time for you to perhaps note yet another issue, maybe of something of concern if we think about a congressional race as being not only the national scene, but regionally and then very locally within the 5th District.
Well, people often take for granted some things like drinking water. I've spent so much of my time in Congress working to preserve and protect safe drinking water, partly precipitated by the Flint water crisis, of course, but also other threats. One that we know too much about now in Michigan is the threat of a chemical known as PFAS. It's a family of chemicals. So whether it's getting lead out of drinking water or making sure that we clean up the damage done to our environment and our groundwater through the use of PFAS in firefighting foam and manufacturing, I have made it my business and have become a leader on the issue of clean and safe drinking water. And that's a subject that, just a few years ago, you wouldn't expect to be a conversation because people just assume that the water is safe. We now know that we can't make that assumption, and we need effective investment and protections to make sure that when you turn on that tap, you can have the confidence that the drinking water isn't going to hurt you. And I have made that a very high priority in my work in Congress and will continue to do so.
Do those issues, and we sort of rephrased this from earlier, how difficult is it to keep these from taking too much of a back seat, given the fact that COVID-19 is as prevalent as it is on the national scene?
It's a good question, and it's important to note that while the public attention in terms of the daily news might be focused more on COVID-19 and all the issues surrounding that, the daily work of Congress continues. So we continue to work on these issues with not perhaps as much attention, for good reason, because there's a national emergency going on. But it hasn't prevented us from continuing to push forward legislation to deal with protecting the Great Lakes, protecting our groundwater, securing our drinking water, and then those issues as prescription drug prices or the cost of healthcare generally. We continue to work on those issues, but just with less fanfare, less attention, because the natural attention is on this terrible pandemic that's been affecting the entire world.
In the last half minute we have with you then, Congressman, a final message you would leave with the voters as they go to the polls.
Well, I have worked to get things done. I believe that it's not good enough just to be on the right side. You actually have to deliver for the people you work for. And to do that, you've got to be able to work with people you disagree with. I work across the aisle every single day. Every success I've had has been a bipartisan effort. And if that's what people are looking for, I'm the person that I think they should consider. That's been the way I've done my job, and I'll continue to.
We certainly appreciate your time speaking with us and directly to the voters as well. Good luck with the rest of the campaign. Stay safe, and thanks so much for the time today.
Thank you.
We have been speaking with Congressman Dan Kildee, a Democrat seeking a fifth term to represent Michigan's 5th congressional district. All qualifying candidates for these offices were invited to participate in our series. I'm David Nicholas. On behalf of all of us here, thank you for your time, and please do remember to go out and vote Tuesday, November 3rd.